This week on Waxing the Porpoise, G-Baby and the usual suspect Steve welcome a very special guest and friend of the show, dad of the show, aka the usual suspect senior, Steve's dad, or simply Tom, for what is sure to be a two-parter. Join us as we discuss the Tomfather's time as a medic and firefighter before ultimately joining the police academy and then hitting the streets. Along the way, he'll share some fun and insane stories which really illustrate how crazy of a job being a cop truly is. Do you have any idea how hard it is to subdue someone high on PCP?
And what the hell is that smell?
Be sure to stay tuned for Volume 2 where we'll discuss his later career, including his time in the Secret Service. Let's wax his paternal porpoise.
Chase, don't do that.
You see, we working on his brow chakra. We're just in back of the crown chakra.
Lion face. Lemon face. Ooh. All right, welcome to Waxing the Porpoise. We are back again, episode 53. This is a very special episode I'm excited to get into. This is going to be similar to kind of an interview style, I suppose, when we had Richard on previously with the Coors Light Chronicles. I haven't come up with a fancy name yet, so we're just going with Steve's dad, episode 53, and we'll see what shakes out of that. But yeah, I'm excited to have Steve's father on, and we're going to wrap for the next little bit. So introduce ourselves here. You got myself, as always, Jim G. Baby.
It's just been revoked.
And of course, the usual suspect, Steve.
Look, he's waving. Hey, he's just your old man. He's as full of shit as anybody. Hey, what's going on?
Breathing through the wrong fucking eyelid again? No,
Shut up.
How's it going, man?
Doing good. Dad, have you ever seen Bull Durham?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is good. But I will say, I do get my general lack of interest in movies from this guy here. So
This is where it stems from?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You think I haven't
Comes
seen
by it
very
naturally.
Yeah, it's funny. Steve and I can be polar opposites in some ways, and movies is definitely one of them, which is was the impetus for this whole show to begin with. So
I have watched The Godfather, though, Jim. I can tell you that.
okay, well that's solid ground there. At least we can. That's one major classic that we won't hold against you. And then special guest this evening, Steve's father, Tom.
Yes.
I hereby sentence you, Michael Bolton, to a term of no less than 4 years in a federal pound-me-in-the-ass prison.
Happy to be here.
Awesome, yeah, it's great to have you. That was a special request. Steve told me that story when we were working together. That was the hardest he'd ever seen his dad laugh. Was that clip from Office Space?
Yeah, it scared me. I can still remember sitting there, the laugh that came out I'd never heard before. It just hit him just right, and
Yeah, it did.
it's a funny part. So you knew that was coming already?
Yeah, when you said you had a special clip, I knew exactly what you were talking about.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is a funny movie.
I have a similar thing with I've told before, but my grandfather, I hadn't seen him laugh very many times in my life up to this point, and I happened to sit down one time and he was watching an old rerun of Saturday Night Live, and it was when Dana Carvey was impersonating Julia Child, and when she was chopping the carrots, she just chopped her fingers off and blood started spurting, and she acted like nothing was, and she's like, and then we'll go over here, we'll put and my grandpa just, and it kind of the same way, it kind of scared me because I had never heard, it was like a full-on rolling belly laugh. So
Yeah.
But cool. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on, just from the few anecdotes and just hearing about your career path and what you did for a living. Should be ripe for some cool conversation. And who knows, maybe during the course of this, maybe there'll be some cool stuff that Steve hasn't ever heard before, or we'll learn along the way together too. So
hope I don't bore you to death.
No,
I think we're in good hands.
No.
So yeah, getting on to the good stuff. Did you have a particular spot that you want, or a story that you wanted to start with, or did you want to give like a brief background on your pops?
Yeah, you're talking to me, right?
Yeah, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, Pops is probably too humble to talk too much about himself in too glowing of terms, but I mean, he's basically lived 3 or 4 separate lifetimes in his short life so far. Kind of going through, the really short version is in college and after college, went from being a paramedic, a firefighter, a cop, Secret Service, lawyer. And so I guess I would, and I've always thought and said that he should write a book because he has so many cool stories that, he's not the type of guy that's like, let me regale you with all these cool stories. They kind of just have slowly leaked out over the years. So I've always thought he should write a book. So this might be another cool way of getting some of those stories immortalized. But I guess, I mean, I kind of think this is going to be a 2-parter because there's so much meat on the bone. I would hate to just rush through everything. So if you're willing to maybe come back and talk about
Sure.
more of your stuff, I figured we would kind of split it between up through the police department, and then the part 2 could be all about the Secret Service because, I mean, there's so much for both of those topics. And I mean, if we really wanted to one day, we could go back into early childhood trauma if you want, but I kind of wanted to just start with like the college years because that's where you first became like a paramedic and firefighter. Is that right?
Yeah. I was my last couple of years in college. I was an EMT on an ambulance that helped supplement my income.
Mm-hmm.
I always knew I wanted to get into emergency services, and I knew from high school that I wanted to be a cop. So in college, I love the emergency services. So I went through the EMT program and then worked on an ambulance for the last couple of years in college. And then in my end of my first year in college, I had joined the volunteer fire department. So there was a time, like my last 3 years in school, I was a volunteer fireman, firefighter, and an EMT. And what was kind of cool was the fire department only had a couple of full-time guys to drive their trucks, and they really relied on the volunteers to show up to, put out fire. But they also had a rescue squad, which no one drove in that particular firehouse because nobody was an EMT or a paramedic. And then when I joined and got my EMT, not only was I a volunteer fireman, but I also drove the rescue squad, which was really cool. It was a lot of fun. And this is back in the 70s when this is all kind of, the whole paramedic program and everything was really kind of new. So it was exciting.
Wow. Yeah. And you had mentioned
sorry.
No, you're fine. It's a different setup than most people I think would imagine where, the ambulance drivers work for the hospital. They pick you up and take you to the hospital. There was like independent paramedics and EMTs working. So how did that work exactly?
Yeah. So the ambulance company in the town I was living in, going to school, was a private ambulance concern. It was a private company. And so you would work for this private employer, and he had his office, which was kind of a converted house because you worked 12-hour shifts. You either worked all day or you worked all night. And so it was a converted house that had bedrooms you could sleep in, and if you were working at night and you were tired and you didn't have a call, you could sack out for a little bit. And then the rest of the house was converted to an office. And then outside the house, we were on a cul-de-sac, and outside the house is where they parked all the ambulances. So it was really rather informal, but it worked well. And, we would get the calls from the 911 dispatcher, and we would respond to, wherever the emergency was. And at that time, this is the mid 70s. And at that time, the paramedic program was just kind of getting started countrywide, but also just getting started in California. And the hospital actually had paramedics that would roll out of the hospital, and they drove a pickup truck.
Wow.
And they had their equipment in the back of a pickup truck. They would have the like a Stokes basket. You see these rescue baskets.
Mm-hmm.
You could put a person in. So they would have a couple of backboards and Stokes baskets in the back of their pickup truck. And if it was a code 3 call, like a auto accident, bad injury call, they would dispatch the paramedics out of the hospital in their pickup truck, and they would dispatch us in the ambulance. And so we would respond together, and they, if it was something that required paramedic care, they would do that. And then we would load them in the ambulance and take them back to the hospital. So,
Wow.
Fast forward a few years, and you don't have that model anymore. It's either, hospital run or fire department run or private, like AMR, and they still respond with the fire department, but you don't have this split function between, hospital paramedics and the ambulance company anymore. But it was new ground, and I think everybody was just trying to figure out their way through it. But for me, being, 21 years old, it was, it's like a kid in a candy store. I just had so much fun doing that.
Yeah, that sounds wild. That whole model too, like having, was it like by region you'd have a certain private company, or was it up to the hospital, like who they wanted to use based on service or what kind of rates they would charge? Like, that sounds interesting. Like how, like who would you go to?
Yeah, as far as I could, as far as I know, they, the company I work for would handle a fairly large regional area. And it wasn't until you got into a different county or different remote area that they had their own ambulances. So I guess the dispatcher would have to look at where did it happen. And there wasn't any competition. If it happened in our area, we were it.
Oh, okay.
And if it was outside the county in a different county or a remote part where there was another a private ambulance company, they would get the call.
That was their turf. Okay.
Yeah, but the resources were pretty slim. I mean, the company I work for would man basically 2 ambulances 24 hours a day. So if there was a more significant problem, a large accident or something, they would probably be pulling in ambulances from other counties and then calling in, medics who were off duty trying to staff the unmanned ambulances. So it was pretty thin.
Yeah, I can imagine. And for point of reference, I don't know if you want to disclose this or not, but what region? You said we're in California. What region is this? Southern California, or?
Oh, it was Butte County.
Oh, okay.
That we were in. So we handled almost all of Butte County, and I think the closest other ambulance was like in Colusa or Glenn County. It was quite a ways away. I mean, we handled a really large area.
Yeah.
So for those people who are not in the area, that's a good 30 to 60 minute drive. If you needed another county.
Butte County's a good sized county.
Yes.
And it's got a lot of different terrain too, especially in like the northeastern corner too, when it crosses up into like Plumas and all that. Like if you get up in like 32 towards Lake Almanor, can get pretty hairy.
Yeah, we would have calls of auto accidents on Highway 32 that would take us a half an hour or 45 minutes to get there.
Yeah.
And it was tragic.
Well, and I think you had also mentioned, I think this is when you were on the PD, that the Butte County Sheriff at night would have like one deputy for the entire county just roaming around. Am I misremembering that? Or?
Well, yeah, fast forward a couple of years when I'm on the police department, on the police force, the sheriff, Butte County Sheriff at night, covering all of Butte County, would field 2 cars, North County and South County.
Wow.
That's so crazy.
And typically what they would do is they'd stay pretty close to each other,
just in case.
That your only backup is, the other deputy. And if you're down in the south part of the county and he's in the north part of the county, you're hoping there may be some, Orville PD close or a CHP or something, but there's no guarantee you're going to have any backup anywhere. So it was kind of dicey.
Man,
So
that makes me think of real quick the the Alaska state trooper or something. You know how limited resources they have up there, and it's like they
Yeah.
have one trooper per like 4,000 square miles or whatever it is. But I mean, that's
Yeah,
wild. This is in like the late 70s ish.
Yeah, and early
Man.
80s, mid 80s, up to mid 80s. Yeah.
if you had to
You were going to say
guess,
something, Steve?
I was just going to say to illustrate, if you had to guess, how many square miles do you think that is, or like, how far is it north south versus east west? Because it's a big area for those that
It's yeah. I'm not sure. I'd hazard a guess. If you think about crossing the Butte County line south near outside of Marysville somewhere, and then driving all the way up to Tehama County, it's a long drive.
It's according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Butte County has a total area of 1,677 square miles.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
So do you happen to remember any of your first like memorable calls when you were a paramedic, or just so I don't keep using the wrong terminology, what is it? Because I don't know the difference
Just
between
an EMT. We were just called medics.
Okay.
EMTs, and then of course there were paramedics, which became a more robust program as time went on.
Okay.
So, but we were just medics or EMTs.
So did you ever have any calls early on where you got there and the shit had hit the fan and you were wondering like, oh, I don't know if this is actually what I want to do? Like, because I imagine you see some crazy stuff.
Yeah, that probably not that reaction, because I really enjoyed what I did, and seeing tragedy or whatever didn't turn me off. It made me feel like this is what I want to do. This is why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
But being a small company, ambulance company in a fairly large county, you're rolling all the time, and you would get everything. You would get, auto accidents, industrial accidents. We rolled on a lot of construction sites where, carpenters and these kind of guys would cut themselves with circular saws. That was a real common call to get, where these guys get so familiar with their hand tools. They'd lay a board across their leg and cut it with a saw, and every now and then, it would go right through the leg, and that was not all the time, but fairly common. Or they'd take their fingers off, this type of stuff, or like I said, auto accidents. We would get a lot of heart attack and medical type calls, and it's funny because one of the things that I noticed early on, and it still sticks with me today, is that a lot of heart attacks occur early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of reasons for that I could see. And one of them is, you would get couples or whatever who would wake up in the morning and their partner would not be moving. And so they would call, and that would be an early morning heart attack call. The other is a lot of people, when they wake up in the morning, they're, as I heard a doctor describe one time, you get those wake up hormones starting to run through your system, and then they would go to the bathroom and strain, and very typical of having to have a heart attack right about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And if you were working a night shift that got off at 7, you knew your last hour or two, you're going to be busy.
Oh, man.
And then the shift that's coming in at 7 or 8 or whatever, they know they're going to hit the ground running.
Yeah.
But like I said, even to this day, if I'm sitting outside on a summer morning and it's 6:30 and I hear the siren, I'm thinking it's a heart attack.
Wow.
And, just, 50 years later, it's still with me, that feeling of that early morning code 3 run on a heart attack call. So kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's weird how you see little patterns like that start to emerge. And I can't remember where I heard it, but I heard somebody saying the same thing, that a lot of people have heart attacks in the morning because they get up to use the bathroom. And I can't remember why they said it, but they said that when they get up first thing in the morning, their blood like shifts, or there's like a increase or decrease in blood pressure. That if their heart is already kind of on its last leg, that can just be the thing that pushes it over the edge. But yeah,
that would fit.
Yeah, it's weird because the phrase like their blood is shifting, it always stuck out. Like I don't know what that means, but it was memorable.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Hey,
that's
real quick point of order. Can you try to speak up a little bit to kind of offset the lack of being able to hear you?
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Or maybe try to position the mic closer and talk louder in general. The rest for the duration, please.
Yeah, let me see if I can if I can get that up there.
Damn it, what was I going to say? Oh, let me timestamp this. 23:30. Yeah, it was making me think of, I don't know if they're related, but you know how like sometimes if you're like laying down or even just sitting in a chair and like you get up really quickly and I've seen people like faint. I know there's a funky word for it. I thought where you like the blood rushes to your head real quick and you feel like, whoa. I wonder if that same kind of thing is happening when you first wake up in the morning, like you get out of bed and like your body's like starting up and there's so much stuff going on that maybe that has something to do with it. But that's interesting. That makes me think of like probably less legit of an analogy, but like the full moon and being a ton of pregnancies and births and that kind of thing. But
is that a myth about on full moons cops staff more and hospital staff more? I've always heard that. Have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, I'd heard that too. I don't know if there's research or statistics or if it's a myth, but I got to tell you, after, having been on the street for quite a number of years, there was something about full moons that seemed to bring the nut jobs out.
Huh.
And, I worked predominantly at like a swing shift or a graveyard shift. Rarely worked during the day, but usually, like a swing shift or a graveyard, and which was more fun because, that's when, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen at night probably.
And that probably fit into out of necessity because you said you were going to school and working at the same time. So you would do school in the day and then, man, I remember when you first said that, I was like, man, I thought I had it rough, like I know I started out going to just school and then like later on in life, kind of slacking off and then having to play the work and school game. But I can only imagine in like doing that and then rushing around and like ambulance calls and then later on like like volunteer fire department. My grandfather who just passed recently, he was a chief of Corning Fire for 35 years, so I kind of grew up in that firehouse, and that was all. They only had 3 paid positions. I think it was chief, dispatcher, and one other person.
Yeah, that's
so they're very volunteer driven, and a lot of them, like I learned more about like medical aids than I did fire when I was younger, because small towns like that, at that time, like 80% of their calls were all medical aids usually. But
I think those numbers are still probably accurate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and especially in smaller towns that don't have the same kind of resource, they kind of have to lean on those small volunteer driven departments, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can only imagine like being, an 18 to 22-year-old juggling school and doing all this kind of wild stuff at night. Sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was fun. One of the advantages I had and it may be an advantage of working for, a private ambulance company or the regulations were probably more relaxed back in those days, is that, if I was working during the day, I tried to take night shifts because of school, but if I was working during the day, and my partner, because you always had a 2-person, 2-medic ambulance. You never drove an ambulance to a call by yourself for obvious reasons, I guess. But if my partner had no objection, I would take the ambulance to school and go to school in my uniform with my radio and park the ambulance right outside the door of the building. Campus police had given me permission to park right on the sidewalk outside the building. And if there was a call during class, I'd run out, jump in the ambulance, and we'd go. But if there wasn't, I could get my classes in.
Nice.
So You always knew when Tom was taking a class because there'd be an ambulance outside one of the buildings.
That's just good for the parking.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Well, shit,
So,
chicks dig a guy in uniform too, so you got that going for you.
yeah. Never
Well, I
really
imagine-
had that problem, but
Well, and I can't imagine a professor would be too hard on you if you had to leave suddenly.
no.
Yeah.
No, they were all pretty good about it.
Like, sorry, I have lives to save.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your major in college?
Business administration.
Okay, but you still kind of always had your sight set on like the emergency service world.
Yeah, I mean, even from high school, my goal was always to be a cop. I mean, that's what I wanted to do early on, and but I knew, I was encouraged by my parents to go to college, and it just seemed like that's the path you go. I didn't really even ever consider not going. Maybe that was just the time, at the time, but I remember my dad encouraging me to get a business degree because his thinking was you can kind of use that anywhere as opposed to some other degree that may be a little more specialized and, it might pigeonhole you some more. And I think that was probably good advice. It was a well-rounded education, but I went into college knowing I want to be a cop, which I don't think thrilled my parents very much. And then as soon as I graduated from college, I went right into the police force. So during college, I did the volunteer fireman thing, and I did 2 seasons, 2 summers with what we call Cal Fire now. It was CDF at the time, where you actually live at the fire station 5 days a week, all fire season. And I loved that, but it also showed me, if there's a lot of downtime to being a fireman, to being a firefighter, a lot of sitting around, and it drove me crazy. And I thought, I love fighting fires and I love going to medical aids and all that, but the downtime was brutal, and which was good because it taught me, this isn't really a career path I want to take. So I just kind of stayed focused on law enforcement.
Is that because CDF and Cal Fire or Cal Fire now, do they assist in medical aid type stuff, or they're strictly fire is what?
Yeah, it was rare. And it may be, you may be right, Jim, that it may not even be like in their charter, or whatever, but we rarely ever went to a medical aid.
Okay.
Yeah, because I did 1 season, what they called Schedule B, which was wildland fire suppression. And that was out of the Paradise Fire Department. And all you did was, grass fires, forest fires, that type of thing. And then my next season I did in Chico, which was called a Schedule A fire station. And that was all, like structure fires and car fires and stuff like that. But about the only time we ever got called out to an auto accident, say, was not to render aid, but to stand by, because the car might catch fire, which was really rare, or to hose down, the road, after they drug the wrecked cars off. And that was about it. So very, very little medical. But sometimes the rescue squad would get sent to a medical aid, which when I was a volunteer fireman, I would drive that. So that was fun.
Yeah, I had a couple friends in Cal Fire in the mid-aughts or so, and they said it was a lot of hurry up and wait. They got really good at sweeping, and smoking cigarettes was like a downtime, and chewing sunflower seeds. So it's not all glamorous, but I imagine anymore now, the way the fire season is such a monster, that it sounds really rough. Like I don't know how those guys do that just in that kind of area, or like places like Arizona and that are just like, it just seems like one of the hardest things that you can do.
Yeah. So I liked riding around in a police car. I liked having a black and white. So that was my focus.
So you went to the academy fresh out of college, what, 21?
Well, so kind of how I got into it, my interest in law enforcement, and then how I actually got in the job. I can give you a little background on that. But
Yeah.
when I was in high school, I think it was my senior year in high school, which would have been 1973 to 1974. If you were a senior and you had enough credits or whatever, you could take what they called an A period class. And it was before school started, they would offer these classes, if you wanted to go, it was voluntary, but you had to have decent grades because they didn't want to be wasting their time putting on these classes for people who weren't serious. And one of the A period classes that they offered and I went to was a criminal justice class, a basic criminal justice class. And this was down in the Bay Area where I was living. And it was taught by a detective at San Leandro PD. And I don't know how many mornings we went. Maybe we went 5 days a week, but I was fascinated by his stories of law enforcement and criminal investigation and everything the cops did. It just thrilled me. I thought this is really cool, And then at the end of the class, one of the things they would allow you to do is do an actual ride along with a San Leandro PD officer. So on a Saturday morning, I went down to the police station, actually got to sit through briefing, and then paired up with a uniformed police officer and went out and spent the day with him driving around. And it was just thrilling. It was like this is my career goal. But it was funny because it was day shift, which is typically not as busy as when the sun goes down. But we were driving along. It was not early morning, but like mid morning. And he gets a call of a burglar alarm at a elementary school somewhere in San Leandro. And we roll out there and drive around to the back of the school, and we could see windows broken. And as we're driving up to the back of the building, two guys bail out of one of the buildings that had been broken into and take off running. And, to the chagrin of the officer I'm riding with, I bail out of the car and take off. And I take off after one of them.
Yeah.
And he's running for the fence, and I'm about to catch him. I'm about to go hands on and take him down when another San Leandro PD car that was, rolling for backup sees what's happening and drives across the field and cuts this burglar, his kid. He was a kid. He was older than me, but he was still a kid. Cuts him off, and they hook him up and throw him in the back of the car, and off. And off. So then we do the paper. We do the report on the burglary and go back to the station and book these guys. And so I think they caught the other guy too. But the officer was like, so really shouldn't do that. He was so nice, but he was kind of like, you could just see he's thinking, here goes my career, but then, but I went home after that, and I think the adrenaline stayed in my system for probably a week. It was just like coolest thing ever. So that was a weekend. So Monday morning, we're back in class, and the guy who's teaching the class starts it a little bit, and then he looks over at me and he was talking about what happened over the weekend with the ride-alongs. And he looks over at me and he goes, and you caught a burglar. And it's just like something clicked inside of me. And I thought, yes, I did.
That's awesome.
Oh, but it was like, there was no talking me out of it at that point. And off I went. That was it. And then, so go to college and then write. Well, and so funny little side, I'm in my last year of college, and I'm a volunteer fireman, and I'm a medic. And that's being a medic was kind of, that's where I made my money. That's where and I got it in my head that, now's the time to start pursuing law enforcement. So while I'm still in college, and while I'm a volunteer firefighter, and while I'm a medic, I joined the Butte County Sheriff's Department as a reserve deputy sheriff. Wow. So I'm doing school and these 3 other jobs. So whenever I have any spare time, I would go down to the sheriff's substation, grab one of the guys and ride along. And my training was minimal. I only had to take like 1 class at Butte College to get certified as a reserve. And now this is in the 70s. Get certified as a reserve. So I'm in uniform, gun belt, badge. I look no different than a regular deputy, but I had like 1 class so I couldn't patrol by myself, but I could ride along. And so I did that until I finally graduated from college. And then I took a job. I got a job almost immediately with the PD. So that was just I look back on it now and I'm thinking, holy smokes, what were you thinking?
That sounds like that's like full immersion, It sounds like that's the kind. No wonder you got hired so quick. Like that sounds like the well-rounded kind of individual I would want, like right away, and like maybe that's what's missing from this day and age, like I don't know.
Yeah, either that
That's
or they
wild.
looked at me like, can't you figure out what you want to do? I mean, settle on one thing,
I can only imagine like how, you hear, I don't want to get political or anything. And people like to knock cops nowadays, but until they're in trouble. But I mean, it doesn't take much to just hop in, go to the academy and go. It sounds like, it should be a little bit more like I know other countries, it's more robust, and like more well-rounded. And it sounds like, knowing the kind of individual you are and the career you had, I'm sure all that kind of stuff played into it, like having a little bit of flavor of, going on medical calls and the fire and school and having all and juggling all that and keeping it all together and becoming and wearing the reserve sheriff hat. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was funny. I look back on it now and I think, you couldn't do that today. I mean, just the liability aspect alone, you couldn't put a guy out there with, and it's funny because right after I graduated from college and I get on full-time police department, my first week on the job, they were working 5-day work weeks. So my first week on the job, my first 4 nights, and I was working nights, my first 4 nights I spend each night with a different officer. So I rode, double car, 4 nights with a different guy. On the 5th night, I come into briefing and I figure, well, I'm just going to double up with somebody. And the lieutenant, the watch commander, tosses me a set of car keys and says, okay, you're on your own. Don't get into anything you can't get out of. And I thought, holy smokes, So my field training program was all of 4 nights with 4 different guys. And I worked by myself, in a black and white for 4 months before they sent me to the academy.
Oh,
Holy
wow.
cow.
I didn't know
So
that.
this is before police academy?
Before.
Wow.
So it was 4 months of on-the-job training, and then I went to the academy.
So was that unique to you, knowing what kind of individual you were and like the variables, or was that anybody coming in off the street? They'd be like that.
When they hired
don't need
me,
to be modest either.
No. I don't think it had anything to do with me. I think they hired me because they thought, well, you're probably not, a crazy man, you're probably capable, knowing what they were going to do. But when I got hired, there were 3 of us that were hired at the same time. And all 3 of us kind of went the same pattern. We worked for months and then sent off to different academies. One guy was sent off to an academy in Butte College, and I was sent off to Modesto
nice.
at a regional police academy down there. And I don't remember where the third guy went, but we were all working by ourselves out there doing it for 4 months before
That's crazy. People now bitch and moan about like, oh, they only go to an academy for 3 months or whatever it is, and they become police officers. Like, dude, back in the 70s,
yeah,
you got the keys to a black and white for 4 months before It's
Isn't
so
that crazy?
where we've come from, like just the 70s to now, how everything, it seems like it's ramped up with like technology. There's so much more red tape and everything's compartmentalized and it's got to be official and this and that. And it was
Yeah.
not very long ago. Like that's so wild.
Yeah,
to grow
I mean,
up.
the training they get now is much more extensive. It's, like I said, three or 4 month academy, and then you go into an FTO program, field training officer program, which are, is so much different. Those are usually 16-week, depending on the department. So, you get a lot more training now
Mm-hmm.
than we did, and of course the job is much more difficult now. It's much more dangerous, and
Yeah, it's a completely different world.
it is. It's crazy.
Did you know any of that stuff, Steve?
No, not really.
Dang.
I mean,
Well,
little
You've
bits
been
and
sitting
pieces,
on the good
but
stuff, Tom.
Apparently, so don't tell your brother.
yeah. So, speaking of Ryan, my brother, your son, also, you know him. He was telling me
You
that
know, your son.
you had a pretty crazy experience with. He referred to it as your first ride along, but it had to do with a car that like sideswiped a chain link fence, and there was like a catastrophic injury to the person.
Oh,
Does that ring a bell?
oh, that's funny that he would remember that. It was, yeah, I mean, that was kind of tragic. That actually happened when I'd been on the department for probably, I don't know, 5 years. I was working I had a special assignment. It was me and one other guy that were assigned to a traffic division on the police department, but it was a grant where these me and this other guy were dedicated specifically to major injury and fatal accidents. And
wow.
I think the thinking was that if you could fund a couple of cars, a couple of officers to work, major injury and fatal accidents and, gather some data on which could be used maybe to prevent these things. And also when you weren't doing that, they would have you do some traffic enforcement, but usually you were pretty busy handling auto accident claims. But yeah, it was just a freak accident that Ryan was probably talking about, where late at night, alcohol involved. I know it's a shock. High speed, single vehicle going down a residential street, lost control and went sideways, passenger side sideways into a chain link fence. And the passenger window where the passenger was sitting, right, hit a gate at the chain link fence. And the passenger in it, of course, their head went to the right when they slammed sideways into this chain link fence gate, and tragically ran the bolt right through this girl's head.
God.
And it was one of the more bizarre. I mean, I went to a lot of bizarre accidents where you look at it and you go, holy smokes, how in the world did you do this? But it was just one of those freak things where it probably would have been, but for the fact that car hit that chain link fence sideways right at the gate, and the gate was right at the passenger window. But for that, it probably would have been a non-injury accident. He probably would have driven off. Probably would have been a hit and run.
Mm-hmm.
But as it turned out, and one of the tragic things about that is
the drunk driver lived.
Well, of course, they usually always do. But the auto accident, of course, it was loud, and it's early in the morning, and that brought the neighbors out. And as I recall, one of the neighbors who came out was a reporter with a local TV station and got a camera on that scene, broadcasting it. The family saw it before we had notified them that their daughter had been killed.
Wow.
And that created a real brouhaha for the TV station.
Man, that's weird. Even back then, people had that inclination to just put it on film. That sounds like something this day and age, someone would whip their phone out like right away, and like this person just happened to be a news reporter and had big ass 80s camera
Right.
at the ready. Gosh.
Right. And that may have been why I remembered that case so well. Because I investigated a lot of fatals, and that was kind of a bizarre one. But I think it was just the whole thing with getting it on the air so quickly and the family seeing it, which you think about the odds of both those things happening.
Yeah.
It was just weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
So that probably was what Ryan was talking about, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, I do have the story you were telling about chasing that guy down reminded me of a slightly more lighthearted story that you might have to correct my memory, but it had to do with you chasing a guy down, and there was some assistance from a member of the general public.
Yeah.
You want to tell that story?
Yeah.
This one always made me laugh.
Yeah, it's, it kind of reinforces your faith in the general public.
In humanity.
But this was a daytime thing, and I was just driving down the road, and I saw a guy standing on the side of the road, and as soon as he turned and looked at me, you could just, if there is such a thing as a guilty look, this guy looks at me, and it was written all over his face that there's something wrong here. And so I just drove past him, turned around, and came back. And when I came back, he took off running. And so I took off after him, and he ran into a field. And so I drove as far as I could, and then I bailed out of the car because I didn't want to ruin the bottom of my car and, chasing this guy for what I didn't even know why he's running. I figured he was wanted. Turned out he was.
Well, and if anybody's wondering, you are allowed to chase somebody just because they run from you, right? It's not how would you explain that? Like you have probable cause to chase them because they look at you and run, or how is that?
Yeah, it kind of goes to the consciousness of guilt evidence.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're walking up to somebody and they look at you and they take off running, then and of course I haven't researched the law on that in the last 40 years, so I don't know if that's still the case or not. But so anyway, this guy takes off running. And, I chase him for a while in my car, and then I get out and I call it in that I'm in foot pursuit. So I get out of the car and I'm chasing him on foot. And the next thing I know, I hear the roar of this engine coming up behind me. And this guy in a 4-wheel drive truck passes me, gets up to the bad guy that I'm chasing, cuts him off. The driver of the pickup gets out and starts to just pummel this guy I'm chasing, and I'm yelling, stop, but he's just, he's put this guy down and he's keeping him down and his fists are flying and he's a big boy. And so I finally get up there and, this suspect is subdued, of course. He's got no fight left in him. He had no gas to begin with, let alone, to fight. So anyway, I roll him over on his tummy and I put my knee in his back and I'm hooking him up, cuffing him up. And the guy jumps back in his truck and takes off. And it's like, I have no idea who this guy was. And my backup comes rolling in, and it was a guy named Gary. And I said, Gary, did you see that truck? And he goes, yeah. And I go, did you get the plate? He goes, no. It's kind of like, why would I?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, man. So, fortunately, the guy wasn't in too bad a shape, but it's, the booking photo of him looks like we beat the daylights out of him.
Yeah.
And I'm trying.
Geez, Tom, wouldn't take it
right.
easy, buddy.
And I'm trying to explain to the sergeant, no, this wasn't me. This was a phantom guy who came out of nowhere, and the sergeant's looking at me like, yeah, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
It does seem like
such a good. It was the one-armed man.
Exactly.
It does seem like such a good cover story. Like, this guy just came out of nowhere and beat the shit out of him and then drove off. And
it's so funny that what's that guy's story? Like, he's just driving by in big 4x4 truck and sees that dude running from the cops and is like, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah.
And then takes off like,
put him down. And it's like, here you go.
I mean,
I got him for you.
Even if he would have hung out, like, what would you do? Just tell him thanks and then encourage him to get out of there? I can't imagine you would like detain him or anything, right? Unless
I mean, the
really,
right thing to do would be to get his information and put it in the report, and
yeah,
But then I don't know, or you just say you might want to leave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I mean, that happened a number of times where I'd be down on the ground hooking somebody up, and some passerby would come by and get a few licks in. And, it was just, and usually you're kind of in the middle of a melee where, there's, all kinds of stuff going on, and somebody will come and they'll put the boots to them, or, get some kind of lick in. And you got to think this goes back to an earlier fight they had or an earlier argument. Now they see their adversary down and, incapacitated. So they're going to go get a lick or two in and then disappear into the crowd. That happened a number of times.
Interesting.
Man, that's ballsy, because that's not, I was thinking, purely like Good Samaritan situation, but then, that makes sense. If like two guys are in kind of a ruckus and one gets away and he slips in to get a couple jabs. Man.
Yeah. I had a call one night where New Year's Eve, which was the worst night in the world. The only thing worse than New Year's Eve would be, I guess, New Year's Eve on a full moon. But but we got a call, and this was back in the mid '80s where PCP was a big deal, and somebody had slipped this guy some PCP, and he just went nuts at a fraternity party, and it was a fraternity house full of football players, and they were all big guys, and he basically goes into this house under the influence of PCP, and commences to just clean up. He's just knocking everybody around. And
was he a particularly like scrawny type of dude?
Yeah, it was just a little guy,
just a little gangly dude.
But he just had that superhuman strength and no pain threshold whatsoever. But it was just typical PCP, where they're just crazy. And they, a bunch of them jumped on this guy and they were able to drag him out of the house, but, kicking and fighting and biting, and they get him on the front lawn and they get him face down. And when I get there, there are literally like 6 guys on top of this guy, and he's still fighting.
Man.
And I'm thinking, oh man, PCP, right? And so I walk up to it, and it's all these guys can do to keep him on the ground. And these are big dudes. And so I'm kind of looking at the situation like, what am I going to do? And so I tell the guys, we got to get his hands behind his back, but I don't want anybody getting off of him, or we've got a real problem on our hands. So everybody stay on top of him, but let's try to get his hands behind his back. If I can cuff him, and I would cuff his hands and I would cuff his feet, his ankles, and then I would I had a dog leash and I would run it and hog tie him. Mm-hmm. And it would take enough of the fight out of him that he couldn't hurt anybody. And you just had to do that. And so while I'm down trying to get this guy's hands behind his back, which was more work than you might imagine, somebody walks up behind me, and, in your uniform pants, you've got these pockets, you've got back pockets. Okay. And then below the back pocket is a little slit, and it's a long pocket, and you can put your flashlight. In the old days, you carried these big flashlights.
Huge mag light.
Big mag light. And I was carrying a stream light, which was would be the equivalent of like maybe a 6D cell light, super bright for the time. So I had my flashlight in they call it a sat pocket. And I had my flashlight in my sat pocket. I'm down on the ground. I'm down on my knees trying to get this guy's hands behind his back. And somebody walks up behind me and pulls the flashlight out of my pocket and hits this PCP guy over the head as hard as I've ever seen anybody get hit with a metal tube before.
Yeah.
Then he drops the light and takes off into the crowd, because there's this huge crowd around us, watching the festivities. I have no idea who he is. And now I got a PCP, subject with a big old gash in the back of his head. And now I got to call an ambulance. And we finally get the guy cuffed up, hands and ankles. His head is bleeding. He's snarling and fighting and biting. We get him up onto the gurney. He's chewing on the gurney mattress. Just superhuman, out of control. But I felt so sorry for the guy because, he just got this big gash in his head now. Anyway, they took him to the hospital and I don't know if they gave him Narcan or whatever they give him, but they detoxed him and got him okay.
Yeah, I mean, a strike like that could kill somebody.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because when I felt the flashlight come out of my back pocket, it was a weird feeling like, what the heck, And then all of a sudden, all I see is my flashlight coming down on this guy's head. Gosh. And my first thought was, that's a $200 flashlight. The heck are you doing? You don't hit anybody with your flashlight. Are you crazy?
Gosh.
But yeah. I'll tell you a follow up to that. So, we got the guy to the hospital and, got some care and got his head taken care of. Unfortunately, it wasn't any long-term damage to, from that hit. And the only reason I know that is like a week later, I'm in the police station and this guy comes in and I think he came in with his dad, came in with an older guy, came up to the window, the police station, and asked for me. And so I was in the back and they come and get me and bring me up. And as I'm walking up to the window, I see this guy. He's got two black eyes. His face is all puffy. And I walk up to the window and he says, do you remember me? And I said, no, I mean, I don't even recognize you. And he goes, I'm the guy that was under PCP at the party. And I'm looking at this guy and he had taken such a beating that night that I didn't even realize what a beating he took.
Wow.
But in his rage, these football players apparently had got a lot of hits in on him. And here he is standing at the window and he says, I just wanted to let you know, I just wanted to apologize for my behavior. And He told me, he says, I had been given PCP and I wasn't aware. And that we confirmed that through some witnesses at the party is that they thought it would be funny to slip this guy, little guy some PCP.
This will be a little barrel of laughs.
Yeah. And, but I'll never forget him showing up at the window. I don't think of all the, people I'd arrested or had any contact with. Nobody ever came back and said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
man,
it was crazy.
I mean, not that there's people out there that deserve a beating like that. But especially not this guy who was slipped PCP. I mean, gosh, yeah, that does make me feel bad for him now.
It was tragic.
I mean, you think of people that that are in that world and that they're just out of control. You're not going to have the same level of sympathy for someone who has slipped it and then could have been killed by a mag light shot to the head. That's crazy.
Imagine how much
through
pain he was in when he sobered up after getting his ass kicked.
Just all hit you at once. Ugh.
Yeah, when I saw him a week later, he still, it still had to be hurting big time.
Yeah.
I felt sorry for him.
I remember one of our coworkers, he used to be a real rough and tumble character because he started when he was 19. So he was in prime party mode in the Chico area. But I remember one time he came in and I didn't hardly recognize him because I've heard the term getting your ears boxed in. Mm-hmm. And he came in a Monday morning after being out all night and his ears were boxed in and you couldn't even stick your pinky finger into his ear canal. They were all puffed up, looked like one of those wrestlers with cauliflower. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The black guy. And
is this Tyler?
Crazy.
He went to a party, I think, because he had lost his phone, and he went to a party he wasn't invited to, and was like, "Help me find my phone." And these guys are like, "Or we could just beat the shit out of you." And he got roughed up so bad that the girls at the party felt so bad they took him home. That's how bad it was. Yeah, I remember him coming in. He looked pretty rough, and he was no slouch either.
No, yeah, that's what
he could handle his own for sure.
Yeah, Yeah, and he was like, yeah, I remember just like getting kicked in the side of the head and in the ears, and you could believe it because his ears were just puffed out like sideways, like they were like filled up with air, like balloons. That was weird.
Wow.
He's got
Yeah.
his own set of crazy stories in that area, like waking up on just somebody's front lawn to like EMTs, and then he just took off.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite stories of his. But
There was another instance where you had a guy that you couldn't get under control. I can't remember if that was PCP also, but I think it was in the park, and it's the guy you ended up having to kick in the nuts to try to get him to comply. Do you remember that? The thing that sticks out in my mind is so funny about it is you showed up and 2 or 3 cops were wrestling this guy, and they happened to turn him as you were like approaching, like on a field goal. And the only way to gain compliance, we'll say, is to just kick him square in the nuts. And
They have to man up.
the thing that always struck me as funny about that is, I think it was one of the other cops there told you, well, I don't think you have to file a report on that because you started that kick in the next county.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, good memory. I'm not sure I'm the one who did the kicking, but maybe the statute of limitations is run on that.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
But
someone who isn't me.
Someone who isn't me. But yeah, he said that kick originated from out of county, so we didn't have to worry about it.
Was it another quote unquote guy in a 4-wheel drive that came and kicked the guy in the nuts and then left?
It may have been
your Phantom Good Samaritan.
That was another PCP.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it was real popular before meth.
Yeah.
So is this all in the same area as well? And I can edit stuff out too if you don't want to get too personal about anything. But is this the same region, like Butte County, Northern California?
Yep.
Wow. So that was like the precursor to meth, was like the big problem thing, kind of drug that drove some level of crime. Was PCP was big?
It's you always had heroin and coke and all that, but PCP was a problem because it was so mind altering, and people would just get they'd be out of their mind, and they would be like the Hulk. They would just be physically stronger than they normally would be. But it just physiologically, it had crazy effects on people. They would just go wild. And you always knew when you had a PCP suspect, because not only were they wild, but they would generally be stripping their clothes off.
I was just going to say, just to interject real quick, the only experience or like frame of reference I have, and I'm curious if you have the same one, Steve, is maybe people of a certain age that grew up with the show Cops in the early and mid 90s. I remember there was one in particular that burned in my mind. It was this big dude. He was already a Hulk looking dude, and he was on PCP, and the cops show up to this call, and he's kind of covered in blood, half of his body. He's butt ass naked. And he like punches through a fence with like his palm, like he's trying to reach someone. And the fence it looks like a graham cracker. Like it just splits, and the cops try to subdue him. And he's just walking, just chest out. Like it looked like a Hulk situation. Like it just turns everything up to 11 on you. And even like when they're finally got him on the ground, it took like 7 or 8 cops to subdue this guy. And that's one thing, like when I hear PCP and like the inhuman strength and all that, it's like, it goes back to that moment. And it makes me think too, like, when you hear like mothers that are able to tap into that crazy strength and lift up a car to save their child or whatever, it's just like, it's that for 12 hours or whatever the half-life of PCP is on this just rolling ball of spikes. It sounds like the worst kind of assignment.
Well, and also
show up to.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was pre-taser era, so you didn't even have that to like debilitate him.
When do you switch from like billy club to gun to when like the rules of engagement? How does that work? Like, it's all up to your interpretation.
Yeah, this was before tasers, so all you had was a nightstick, or your gun, and you don't want to be shooting these people. I mean, they're generally not exhibiting deadly force, threat of deadly force necessarily. So I think they would do probably what they did on that cop show is you get 5 or 6 and you just tackle them and hold them down. I mean, that's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And, get as many officers as you can. So, 2 or 3 officers are going to get hurt. 6, maybe nobody gets hurt.
Mm-hmm.
If you can dogpile on them with six, cops, then maybe nobody gets hurt. So, yeah. It was a law enforcement problem for all the years I was working, and that's when they were experimenting with things, non-lethal things like, bean bags and shotguns and nets. Had a number of companies trying to develop a net like you throw over a tiger.
Mm-hmm.
But none of those were really satisfactory. And then somewhere after I left.
What's that mean? Throw over a tiger?
Well, like if you were trying to capture a tiger, you might throw a big net over it.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I guess some departments had some success with netting these guys, but the other thing you don't want to do is some type of subduing tactic, which is really going to hurt the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some concerns if you throw a net over somebody that they could choke themselves or break their arm or whatever, and it's like, well, that's not really the goal, So it just was a problem.
That sounds more amenable to me than the PCP guy going for another 4 hours. A broken arm sounds like an okay trade, but I was thinking, like, what about just like a bolo, or it made me think of like the Empire Strikes Back at the beginning at Hoth when they get the AT-AT, like the walkers, they get the wire around the ankles.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'd want to go for. Like just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think there was a lot of companies experimenting with stuff like that, but it never made its way to us. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know Dad and I have talked about this before, but even somebody who's stone cold sober and not a very strong person, I think a lot of people would be surprised how difficult it is to handcuff somebody if they really do not want to be handcuffed.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it. I see it a lot with these crazy public videos of people freaking out, like little girls who will be fighting,
like women
fighting cops.
You wouldn't think can put up a fight. Yeah, they're slippery trout, man.
It's crazy because you hear the criticism like, well, why couldn't you just handcuff them without, insert whatever? It's like compliance is a difficult thing. So
yeah, you're right.
Dude, I have trouble sometimes getting a diaper on my son, man. If he wants to start corkscrewing, man, it's just like...
Yeah, but your son is a tank, to be fair. I just saw a picture of him the other day.
To be fair, to his credit, he is a ball of spikes himself, but...
That's cute.
So I imagine you had some pretty scary moments, though. Like, I can think of a couple stories you told me where, I mean, you might not have been afraid at the time, but, you can catch yourself in some pretty dicey situations. One that I was thinking about, not necessarily put you in fear of physical danger to yourself, but just general. I can't remember if you were chasing somebody, or in my mind, I thought you were responding to a call of like a little girl who was hurt, and you were running there. And when you got there, you realized your gun was missing.
Yeah.
What actually happened there?
So yeah, I was working a day shift, and so I was getting off at 3, and I was just starting to head toward the police station, and I get this call, or I hear this call go out for, one of these very non-specific, unknown disturbance calls. In other words, somebody called 911 and the dispatcher could not make heads or tails out of it, but the person is obviously there's a problem. So
just screaming like general, it
that
sounds
type
like
of
there's
thing.
chaos going on.
There's chaos, unspecified chaos call, and so
that sounds fun.
Those are all, you never know. You never know what you're rolling into, and so the dispatcher said, unknown disturbance, and it was at this park, and it was a little kids park, and it was fenced all around, specifically because it was a little kids park. So it was a fence all the way around, but in one corner there was an open gate. And so it was an unknown disturbance call inside that little kids park. And I thought, oh, that's not good. And I was close. I was close enough to where I just whipped around and I took the call and drove in, got up to the gate, bailed out of my car. And did we lose Jim?
Oh no, I think
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. So anyway, I bail out of my car, and because the park is large and there's only one entrance, I went in the gate, the open gate, and then I had to run down through the park to get to where I could see a little knot of people crowded around. And it turned out that it was a 12-year-old girl who had dropped with a heart attack. And there was a guy doing very ineffective CPR on her when I got there. And so I just told him to step back, and I went down and I tore the girl's shirt off. And as soon as I did, I could see she had a scar. She had open heart surgery previously. And I started doing CPR on her. I'm on my knees. She's on the ground, and I'm doing CPR on her. I called it in. We had an ambulance coming, and it's, of course, when you're doing CPR like that, it feels like the ambulance takes forever to get there. And so the ambulance crew shows up. I'm soaking wet from doing CPR, and the sweat's just dripping off me. And the ambulance crew gets there, and they take over, and I rock back on my heels because I had been kneeling down. I rock back on my heels, and I instinctively pull my elbow in. You're always checking to make sure your gun is there with your elbow. You're always bumping the grip of your gun with your elbow. It's just something you do all the time.
Sixth sense.
And I pull my elbow in, and I don't feel anything. And I look down, and my holster's empty. And I had been having problems. It was a new holster. I'd been having problems with this holster. I was carrying a 9mm. It's a semi-automatic handgun, 16 rounds in the magazine, one in the gun. So this gun, the gun's gone. I look down the holster's empty, and I look over, and, my backup officer had just showed up. It was the same guy. It was Gary, interestingly enough, from the last story. And I look over at Gary, and I must have had panic in my face. And because I said, Gary, I lost my gun. And he reaches around and he pulls it out of his back pocket and hands it to me. And he says, I found it on the trail coming in. And like I said, I'd been having problems with this holster. The gun just didn't seem to fit right. And I guess when I took off running, at some point, bouncing around, it bounced out. It still had the strap and everything on, but somehow it had bounced out. And the relief I felt was tremendous, because the last thing I wanted was a handgun floating around a little kids park.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I got back to the station, I got rid of that holster, and I actually changed guns for a while until I could have a leathersmith fix that holster but oh man.
Yeah, I would have thrown that damn thing in the trash.
Did you?
What would have happened if you would have lost it? Like, besides the thought of, it being near a children's park, would you have caught a rash of shit from your supervisor or your whoever was, like, the watch commander? Like, oh, you lost your gun? Like,
yeah.
I can't imagine that would be a fun experience.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't go over well. Things happen, but something like that, it was just one of those things where I was so grateful that, Gary was coming up behind me and happened to see it in the dirt, picked it up and then handed it back to me. And I had never had that happen before or after. There was just something glitchy. And you're right, I did get rid of that holster, and I just had another one.
Yeah.
But I got another one, and I had it modified so it really held the gun. Of course, now most holsters aren't leather. They're Kydex, and guns snap in and out. They're much more technologically advanced.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the day, all your leather gear was actually really leather. So
is that when you switched over to the 38 that in your later years you would carry in your purple fanny pack, even including to places you weren't allowed to.
Oh, oh. Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, I actually put that 9mm in my locker for a while and went back to a Ruger 357 that, I had carried when I first started, and it felt weird, but I thought there's no way, just like Jim was saying, there's no way until I could get, a new holster that, I just switched and,
well, cause this was back in the time where you didn't have the department issuing everybody Glock 19s. You could carry kind of whatever you wanted within reason.
Yeah. Most of the guys either carried a Smith & Wesson Model 59, which was a first generation 9mm gun. They had 59s, 659s, and then 5906, different generations of the 9mm. They're a good gun. Or so you could carry. Yeah.
So that's the kind of period where it changed from, I don't know anything about guns, but like the 6-shooter style, like barrel, to the clip style, the more square, hard edge.
Yeah, a lot of guys were still carrying revolvers, 6-shot revolvers.
Did you ever know anyone that wore those badass, like from Bullet, the arm straps where the gun goes here, like
shoulder holster?
Yeah, those are so cool.
Yeah, a lot of guys who would work plainclothes would carry in a shoulder holster. I found them really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine it doesn't feel nice.
Your arms don't hang. You kind of walk around like an ape, because you'll have the gun under one arm, and then under the other arm is generally a couple of speed loaders or magazines or your handcuffs or something, and so it's just really awkward feeling. And it's an odd way to draw a gun, to go all the way across your body to grab it and then come all the way back.
Yeah, it's not right on your hip, like boom. But boy, does it look cool.
Yeah.
Well, and you had a partner that carried like the Dirty Harry 12-inch long monster, 44. Right?
Yeah.
And it would take him forever to get it. It would take forever to get out of the holster.
Well, he carried a 9 on his gun belt, and then he would carry his 44 Magnum, his Dirty Harry gun, in a shoulder holster, and then put his coat. If it was cold, he'd put his coat over it. Don't ask me why, but
thought it was cool.
He thought it was cool.
Cool factor.
Yeah.
You can only get away with that in like a really cold city and not have it be like bulging out,
right.
Somewhere where you wear a coat normally, but yeah.
Yeah.
I always thought that was cool. Like Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon. That's the style he had. I always thought that looked just super cool.
Yeah.
So we're getting to almost the hour and a half mark. I'm cool to keep going if you guys want to for another little spill here. How are you guys feeling?
I just had a couple more little stories I wanted to ask him about, and then I feel like we would be at a good stopping point before we get into the Secret Service stuff, which is really interesting and I think worthy of its own entire episode.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So I don't remember if this happened when you were a cop or a paramedic, but it's a horrifying sounding suicide attempt. I'm not exactly sure. The cocaine knife guy. Yeah. Did that guy live?
Knife guy, man.
Oh no.
Was that when you were a cop or when you were a medic?
Yeah. Matter of fact, your mother was riding with me that night. It's before we even got married.
Oh yikes!
I showed her a good time.
Yeah.
That's one way to win her over. You want to go on a ride along? That's awesome.
Oh, man.
So did she see what happened?
No.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't let her get out of the car.
So yeah, do you want to tell Jim about that?
Yeah, it was a bizarre what turned out to be a suicide. And it took a little convincing of me. It took a little bit for the medical examiner and the coroner to convince me this was a suicide. But, I guess his conclusions were persuasive enough that our homicide detectives didn't get involved. But anyway, get a call, and I don't even remember what the call was, something. something suspicious. And to access this guy's room, and this was typical of a college town where you might have a house, what would otherwise be a normal, single family dwelling, which is broken up into discrete units.
Yeah, like basement, or like a mother-in-law unit or something in the back, or they piecemeal some of the rooms within the bigger house.
Because this was in the middle of college town, right?
Like it's
middle
like 915A, 915B, whatever.
Right. And so this was a house, but where this kid lived, and he was a young guy. He had to go through the alley and then, go through the backyard and enter his room through what was the old sliding glass door of, the back of the house, but that was his room. And I don't remember what the nature of the call was, but it was nighttime and I got sent out there. And so I park in the alley and go through, and because it's a sliding glass door, and I can see inside there's a guy laying there on the ground, and naked, and he's face down, more or less face down. And so I go in, and there wasn't a lot of blood everywhere, but this guy was covered in stab wounds, and they were all on the front of him, and they were all on the left side. And so I'm kind of astonished when I'm looking at this thing, like there was a ton of stab wounds. Some of them were deep and some of them were really superficial. Long story short, this guy had broken up with his partner and just decided he was going to end it all, and had started taking massive amounts of cocaine. This guy snorted so much cocaine that it was coming out of his tear ducts.
Oh, damn.
And I could see that. And so he started stabbing himself, and apparently some of the self-inflicted wounds hurt because he was packing those with cocaine. So the coroner found a number of his more significant stab wounds packed with cocaine. He had almost a lethal amount of cocaine in his blood system, and his nose was just full of it. It was coming out of his eyes. Of course, when I get there and I see this, I'm thinking, well, it's a homicide, Somebody stabbed this guy. Turned out he had 54 stab wounds.
Oh, my God.
To his torso. And as the coroner explained it, the guy was right-handed. All the stab wounds are on the left side. Apparently one knife made all the stab wounds. They were convinced it was suicide. Maybe it was. I don't know necessarily that he may have been alone. I think there might have been somebody there when he started this stabbing frenzy, but that was just speculation on my part. But it was so bizarre that I thought, I wonder, but
yeah, I would
that's
lean
crazy.
Towards a suicide kind of, or just taking it out on yourself kind of thing. Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, I assume they found the knife at the scene. There wasn't anything.
Oh, it was still in his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of factors that kind of fit the scenario of self-inflicted stab wounds, but, I don't think at that point I'd ever seen anybody kill themselves by stabbing themselves. I mean, I went to a lot of suicides, hangings and gunshot wounds and overdoses, but I'd never seen anybody stab themselves to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard like hesitation marks can be a hallmark of that, and
you're absolutely right. And I think that's what the coroner was keying on, was that there were a lot of little superficial, like you say, hesitation. And then some of the deeper ones, he took the time to pack them with cocaine, which I thought was an interesting, thing.
The only reason I know that is actually, I remember, what was that singer, Elliott Smith?
Yeah.
Who killed himself with a knife, and he was having a thing going on with his old lady, and they found hesitation marks. I actually think about that one, and weren't you saying there was something about that made it look like maybe it could have been his
well,
not?
I mean, he was a high profile musician, so there's always going to be some like rumor surrounding his death,
right?
But it's been so long since I've thought about it. I thought the controversy was there wasn't any hesitation marks, and there was
yeah, maybe that's what it is.
and there was two.
Yeah, and then I was like, "What's a hesitation mark?" And then you explain, like, "Oh yeah, like."
And
if
from
you're
what I
going
remember,
through
it was
it's very rare that someone just does it and successfully the first time and just stabs himself 1 or 2 times deeply. It's like,
well,
they're
and it was 2 stab wounds, both to the heart. So I don't know if one person would. I guess presumably they could survive long enough to stab themselves again in the heart, but yeah, it was kind of a bizarre thing that now has like a weird sort of cult.
Yeah. Sorry, though, that's a huge tick of mine that at some point in this I would have to pull us off on a huge tangent. So
Oh, that wasn't bad at all.
Okay.
So one more little fun palate cleanser. You were telling me about a time you were investigating a burglary of a pharmacy, and the gentleman left behind a little bit of a calling card, which helped solve the crime.
Yeah, it's not an uncommon thing for a burglar to leave, like to lose their wallet in a house or a building when they are burglarizing it. That's happened a few times. But this guy was breaking into a pharmacy, and he did it by going to the side of the building, which was not visible from the street, and it was a cinder block wall, as I recall. And he brought a duffel bag full of tools, and he was basically cutting his way into the wall. And I don't think he made it in. I can't remember, but at some point he got scared away. Maybe the alarm went off. That might explain why I was there. But when I rolled up, I could see where he had been working. It may have gotten in. I can't remember, but big hole or almost a hole in the wall. But the duffel bag was a Navy bag that had his name on it. And so what it had a name on it, which turned out to be him, and
wow.
So being the trained investigator that I was, I took that as a clue. But so, I mean, we had a starting point. We had this duffel bag with this guy's name on it. And then there were some surveillance cameras, and it was easy to put him there. But that was one of those that makes its way around the police department. Everybody gets a good laugh over it.
Yeah. Do you find most criminals to be just generally stupid or impulsive, or what's your take on that?
I think you have.
I mean, if they're good at it, they don't get caught. Right?
They don't get caught. Yeah, I think you have the whole spectrum. I think you have some that are stupid. You have some that are impulsive, like you say. But I think what trips a lot of people up, like Jim said, if you're good, you may not get caught. But I think what trips a lot of people up is kind of the law of unintended consequences, that they haven't. They've thought about it and they've planned it, but they haven't thought through all the various things that can trip them up. And it's usually odd, unanticipated, a witness happens by that shouldn't, or there's just some weird thing that provides law enforcement a clue that leads to their, arrest and conviction, that they may have planned it, they may have thought about it, but this just were too many unknown factors that they couldn't control. And that's what trips a lot of people up.
Yeah, I think you have the spectrum is probably, if it's a bell curve, that's probably the wrong kind of visualization, but I'm sure a fat chunk of it is just pure stupidity and maybe impulsivity in there. And then there's like quote unquote good or good at what they do, criminals that just get shit out of luck, like wrong place, wrong time, like you say, like someone just something that they can't factor in, which is why, like, I mean, I like a good conspiracy and I think it's entertaining and fun to think about, but there's so many variables in the world just in general that, like, to pull something off perfectly, even if you have it quote unquote perfect, there's something that you would never think of in a million years and it happens, like Murphy's Law kind of thing.
It kind of reminds me of Stephen and I went to a seminar one time on use of force, and there was one of the scenarios the instructor was talking about was a shooting that occurred in the parking lot of like a 7-Eleven, and the point of the debrief on that was whether or not this was a good self-defense shooting. It wasn't law enforcement. It was, civilian versus civilian, and a gunfight broke out. But the guy who did the shooting took off after shooting the car next to him, the people in the car next to him. After shooting them, he took off and probably would have gotten away, but for a homeless guy,
Yeah.
hiding behind a dumpster, who cops the plate on the car as the guy's driving away, sticks around and gives it to the police, and they track down the shooter.
Man.
And it's like, it's that kind of thing that even the most well-laid plan is going to go awry because you didn't anticipate a homeless guy hunkered down behind a dumpster
And he's
who has the mental wherewithal. He had the mental wherewithal to memorize your license plate.
Man.
Yeah.
It was crazy stuff like that. But I'll tell you the other thing that trips most people up, and, this is your garden variety, run-of-the-mill criminal that, I would deal with as my bread and butter every night, is the guy who's drunk or on drugs. And, that alters their behavior and their judgment, and they get caught because I guess maybe they fall into the category of stupid.
Right.
Yeah.
Stupid by proxy.
So the last story I wanted to ask you about, this was one that Ryan suggested, and when he mentioned it, it sounded familiar. I think we might have talked about it recently, but I don't have it locked in my memory. So I was wondering if you would mind retelling it. It's about the woman with the shotgun who was like barricaded in her room, or she surprised you. I'm trying to remember. I think I might be confusing multiple stories, but do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, that was kind of I think the call we got on that was like a distress call, that this person was threatening suicide, 5150 call, which was, pretty common. It was in an apartment, and she had barricaded the front door of the apartment, but the curtains were open and you could see inside the little living room. You could see she wasn't in there. And the landlord was there, and apparently he was the one who called, and she was threatening suicide and, was having mental problems. And so we're asking him, well, where do you think she is? We can look in the window and see she's not in there. And he goes, well, she's in the bedroom. And so we go in, and there's a little living room, kitchen, dining room, and then a little tiny hallway. And at the end of the hallway is the bathroom. But on the left is a door, and on the right's a door. And I said, well, which one's the bedroom? And he says, the door on the left is the bedroom. And I said, well, what's the door on the right? And he said, that's a large closet. And so we go left, clear the bedroom. She's not in there. And so she must be in the closet. And, no report of weapons or anything. And so my partner and I think he's in front of me. He opens the door, and it's not a closet. It's another bedroom. And she's at the back of the bedroom holding a shotgun, this long-barreled shotgun, and she's holding it kind of a port arms position, so the barrel's pointing up toward the ceiling. And as soon as we open the door, she starts to lower the barrel. And fortunately, the officer in front of me, quick thinking, he just rams her. He just runs and hits her, knocks the shotgun back up. I think he knocked it out of her hands. But the two of them.
So he had to been thinking quick. So as soon as the barrel starts lowering down, he just reacts.
He just reacted. Quick.
That's a ballsy move.
Man, quick thinking, because if another second or two, she'd have had it leveled and pulling the trigger, and she'd have got us both. Man. So he hits her. I think the shotgun must have dropped, but they're now both laying on he's on top of her, more or less on the bed. So she's on her back. He's on top of her. I come running in behind. She reaches around and grabs his gun in his holster and gets it out. So she's pulled his gun out, but she's got kind of an awkward grip on it. She's going to have to flip it around to get her finger, to get a good grip on it. But she's got his gun out. And so I dove over the top of him, and she's far enough away to where I can barely get my hand on it, but I got my hand up on the grip, up on part of the gun, she's fighting, the gun's going everywhere. Everybody's fighting. But I was able to get my hand on the side of the gun and push the mag release, and it dropped the magazine out the bottom of the handgun. And on those 59s, you could not fire the gun if the magazine was disengaged.
Oh, okay.
So I had
even if there was one round chambered.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was a safety feature on the 59, is that if you drop the magazine, even if you hit the magazine button and the magazine just clicked back 2 or 3 millimeters, your gun was disabled. And so anyway, during this fight, I was able to reach my hand over and hit the button and drop the magazine enough. And now the gun is just a bludgeon. Now we don't have to worry about getting shot, and we were able to get control of her and hook her up. And we took her 5150 because she was having all kinds of mental problems. And, but boy, afterwards, man, I got with the other officer, and we were debriefing on that. And both of them were like, crap, that could have gone bad so many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm sure it'd probably just torture you. You wouldn't get any sleep if you thought about each individual incident, like how many different variables, how many different things, if they just go a little bit left or right, or up or down, like how an incident like that could play out. That's
that one kind of bothered me a little bit, because just seeing her leveling that shotgun, if the guy in front of me hadn't moved as quick as he did, and then then the fight's on the bed, awkward, weird position, and then she gets his gun out, and it's like, shit, now we got another problem,
Yeah.
But so I remember going home that night and just kind of sitting on the couch thinking, man, that could have gone bad so quickly, so easily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
what do you do?
It brings you back to that. What's that? Fight, flight, or freeze?
Yeah,
the third alternative. Like,
I wonder.
I found myself in a couple of situations where it's like, I just freeze. You think you want to like dive in headlong, and like sometimes you do, and sometimes you swerve left, and it's not.
Yeah. I wonder if he even thought about it, or if it was just like a reflex, like, I just have to dive at it, because you could see you just hesitate for a split second. And I mean, it would take a quarter of a second for her to drop the barrel and pull the trigger. And I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to pull your gun in time. And then imagine if you're not able to drop the mag. Now your only choice is potentially get shot or shoot this woman. That's not going to be good for anybody.
That was a mess.
But
it was just was a mess.
That does seem like both the guy reacting to the shotgun and being able to hit the mag release. Like, those are two pretty big things, like, because if you hadn't, then you're tussling with like a live gun. Like,
nothing good's going to happen.
No. Well, I mean, thanks for coming on and sharing. I'm sure this is just like a small portion of all the crazy fun stories you have, and hopefully you'll come back and tell us some Secret Service ones that you're allowed to speak of, and that you won't get a drone strike on your house in the middle of telling us about any of it.
A plainclothes serving you a subpoena.
Yeah, I think anything I do is probably ancient history.
You're just going to get a knock on the door halfway through. Oh, there's a couple nice-looking, well-dressed gentlemen at the door. Let me go answer it.
Yeah, this was great. I wasn't sure what to expect. I was pretty nervous going into it, but you seem like a really good hang, Tom. And if you're game, we would love to have. I mean, Steve's your son, so
allegedly,
I'm sure that's a foregone conclusion. But yeah, we'd love to have you back, because I know we haven't. The Secret Service stuff sounds pretty interesting, and if it's stuff you can actually speak on, I mean, I don't even know what that world. I think most people don't know what that world consists of, other than what you see on TV and like 6 guys jogging next to a president and watching him. But that would be super interesting too. And I'm sure there's stuff we've glossed over that we can maybe hit on next time too.
Sure, love to.
Awesome,
sweet.
One other thing before we start wrapping this up too is as we got to, I've known I worked with Steve for a ton of years. We've known each other for 10 plus years, and it's funny, like, stories that have come out during this past year doing this podcast of stuff that I had never heard from him. One story in particular concerning you, he said you didn't remember it, but maybe him mentioning it and now rejogging your memory. He told me a story. I don't know how we got on it. I think it was during Halloween season. I was talking about, my daughter being like digging out the guts of a pumpkin, it being gross and nasty. And Steve said he had a similar event when he was a lad, and he was getting the guts out of the pumpkin and being maybe a little baby about it. And he said you turned to him and you were doing your own pumpkin and you grabbed out some of the guts and you just ate it right in front of him, just like a alpha move. Like, there's nothing being afraid of, kid. Like right there, I was like, dude, this guy's a hog. We gotta have him on. It
was so savage because I still remember the look on his face because I was like, oh, this stuff is so gross. And he just looked over and the face was almost like, oh no, this stuff is good. And just scooped it and took a huge bite. And so gnarly.
And I can't wait because I have a son now. He's a year and a half, and he was like, in diapers, didn't know what Halloween was. But I think by this next one, or maybe a couple down the road, I can't wait. I hope he just starts bitching out on a pumpkin and start acting like it's all, and I can't wait to steal that move because I'm doing it full force.
That's funny. Yeah, Steven had mentioned that a while back. I don't remember doing that, but
sounds right.
I guess I did.
That's such a power move. Like, oh man, that's awesome.
It'll be even funnier if, Jim, you go to do that to assert dominance over your kid, and then you just start puking all over the kitchen.
Yeah, and then it just totally talk about your all-time backfires.
Yeah.
Funny.
It could go that way, man. For as much as I try to bow up, I can be a tenderfoot when it comes to certain things. But cool.
Well, thanks again for coming on. Love ya. Looking forward to the next one.
Love you too, honey. Anytime.
Oh yeah. Congrats. Well, I mean, I know I didn't have the opportunity sooner because I've never met you before, but congrats on becoming a new grandfather recently.
Yes. Very exciting.
Awesome. You digging it?
Oh, I love it. Nothing quite like it.
That's awesome. And how much older is your brother than you, Steve? Just because I never had, is it 2 years? You
4
guys
years.
Are pretty close or no?
Just under 4 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad. Shout out to your brohan as well for leaving us some crumbs on this trail, some stories to revisit.
Yeah,
I'd love to have you back on. This
too.
was a great time, Tom. I appreciate you making the time and regaling us. So, again, we just released our anniversary episode, our Basic Instinct. Check that out. If you want to reach out to us, if you have any questions for Tom, sounds like we'll have him back. For us in general, you can reach out to us at waxingtheporpoise.com or either of our socials. Instagram is Waxing the Porpoise and Twitter is at Waxing the Porp. Next week, looking forward to next week. What do we have next week? We're going to have Staring John back. We're going to cover Skyfall, our second part in the Daniel Craig era James Bond retrospective that we're doing with resident Bond expert Staring John. We are skipping Quantum of Solace just for timing reasons and because it's one of the weaker entries, I feel like, in the Craig era. I'm super excited to talk about this one. This is probably my favorite James Bond of all time. Granted, I haven't seen all of them, so take that with a grain of salt, but it's awesome. It's a great one. Tom, are you a big Bond guy, or have you seen any of the newer ones with Daniel Craig?
No. Steven will tell you I'm not much of a TV or movie watcher.
At all?
Not really.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, it looks from my view, it looks like you're a big book guy.
Oh yeah.
So good on you. I wish I was more. It's just so easy to fall into the trap of just putting on the boob tube.
Well, good. Well, thanks for having me on, and I'll look forward to the next one.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much again. I appreciate you. And thank you guys for tuning in. Appreciate you. We'll catch you on the next one. We'll see you when we see you, and we'll see you later.